So it's great to be here to give you some talks over the next few days. I've never been to this centre. The last time I was in South Africa was with Akon Rinpoche 7 years ago, and this centre happened after that. But I remember Rinpoche was blessing the project and telling you how to get started, and he'd be so proud, I'm sure, to see this place. It's a very beautiful centre, and especially the shrine room. Maybe you might take it for granted because you come here and this is all you know, but I go to all the centres, and this is quite, good quality. It's really beautiful. You're very lucky.
Naturally.
It's beautiful. While I'm here, I'm going to give a few talks. Today is, I think the title of today is Ancient Wisdom for something, modern people.
Modern life.
Modern life. So I'm going to be talking about meditation, of course, and how to practice, but particularly how to bring it into our busy lives. Because very often people learn meditation, but then they completely forget how to integrate it with their life. And hopefully we'll be able to look at some of those issues today. I'm not a meditation master or anything like that, but I do have quite a lot of experience teaching in very unusual situations, meaning that I teach in a very big variety of situations, which has given me a lot of knowledge around how people respond to meditation teaching, people from all walks of life. I do most of my teaching is outside of Buddhist centres. I basically teach in Buddhist centres on weekends, and Monday to Friday I teach in schools and universities, hospitals, clinics, and quite a lot of corporate, in the corporate world, companies. I do that because when I first met Akon Rinpoche, one of the first things he said was, if you want to change the world, teach compassion to business people, because business people actually run the world, not politicians, and we can see that quite clearly at the moment from recent events. So I'm working my way up there. I hope to get to our friend. There's a lot of meditation happening in the UK Parliament. Loads of politicians are doing meditation. So it is spreading. So what I hope to be able to do for you today is to share with you some of that experience, and of course to share with you the teachings I've received from Akong Rinpoche about meditation. So what I want to do to kind of introduce the subject is talk about why we meditate. Now, if you're very new to meditation, this is obviously an important thing to consider, but it's also important to consider even if you've been meditating for lots of years. Because what often happens to people is they meditate and then at some point they think, why am I actually doing this? I mean, what is this for? It's not going anywhere. I'm going around in circles and I'm not sure what it is I'm supposed to be doing. We kind of get lost. So it's very important to keep reminding oneself of the intention, what is it about, and how does it work? If you know how something works, it really gives you faith in what you're doing. So, I mean, let's really take it apart like a car and look at the engine. See how it works. What does it do? I think the first thing is to ask what is the kind of impulse that makes somebody enter the path or stay on the path? What is it that makes somebody want to train their mind? It's when we start to understand the importance of our way of thinking. We start to understand that our mind is everything. I do a kind of experiment when I go into corporate situations. I get them to, well, I say, think of the top 5 things that cause you stress and write them down, or the top 10 things that are causing you stress. Write those down. And of course they would, there's more than 10, they'd write 20 pages. And it's always things like my job, my boss, my colleagues, my clients, my husband, my wife, my children, the weather, my health, the government, whatever, society, deadlines, pressure, loads of things on the list. And then I would say, now look deeper. Ask yourself, is that really true? Is it really true that those things are causing you stress? Or is it your thoughts about those things? Your boss isn't causing you stress, it's the way you think about your boss. Everything is filtered through our perception. So instead of trying to change everything else, why not clean the filter? So then they start to understand the importance of mind. Everything is to do with how we think and how we feel. There isn't anything out there separate from our awareness of it. And once you switch people onto this idea, it's a very simple, very logical truth. And they don't have to be Buddhist, they can be whatever they want to be. But they need to understand how to work with the mind. So that's the first step. You understand that happiness, suffering, everything is to do with mind. So then you want to train the mind. You want to find a method that helps you to work with the mind. Why? It's because when we look at our mind, we start to discover how chaotic it is. In Buddhism they say it's like a monkey jumping around in a forest. Basically, when we try to sit down and make our mind do something, it won't. Our mind doesn't do what we want it to do, and it does what we don't want it to do. So when we really look into our mind, we start to understand that we're not free. Our minds are not free. And that's a very humbling experience. It's a very humbling and very beautiful experience, because we thought we had it all sorted. We thought we were top of the game, organized, efficient, free-thinking, independent. We are to a certain extent. And so I meet people who are senior people in huge companies, in their suits, in their boardroom, and they feel totally powerful, but until you tell them this, and then they start to think about it. Because I think freedom it's a word that is very important to us, but we don't really understand what it is. We've only experienced a kind of social freedom or external freedom. We've fought very hard for rights and freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, all those things, and that's very important. We fought for that, and we defend that very strongly. But there's the one freedom we haven't looked at, which is our mind itself. Because if you look at the mind, you start to see that it's constantly doing things you don't want it to do. It goes to places you'd rather it didn't go. There's very little choice. Very easy to understand this if you look at your moods. If we look at our moods, we don't plan to have those moods. We don't sit there thinking, now what mood shall I put myself in? That's not the way we think. When we get anxious, we don't think, okay, let's do some anxiety now. Tomorrow I'm going to play with depression. Maybe I'll dabble in a bit of fear, see how that feels. I'm stuck in traffic. Shall I get stressed or shall I stay calm? We don't make those choices, do we? Somebody says something to us that really hurts. We don't think, okay, now, how am I going to respond to this? We just shout at them, don't we? Or we feel hurt. We go away holding that hurt, and then we'd rather not. We'd rather drop it. It's not pleasant to be holding resentment, but somehow we can't drop it. It's like holding a lump of hot coal. Why aren't we putting it down? We can't. We keep holding the lump of hot coal, and there's no freedom. So when we look at our mind in this way, we start to discover the need for training the mind. When you try to meditate, you discover this lack of freedom incredibly strongly, because when you sit down to meditate, you plan to sit there for 10 minutes and observe your mind, and what happens? Within 3 seconds we're thinking of what's going to happen for lunch. So we had plans to sit there for 10 minutes focusing on the breathing or whatever the method is. The plan fails within seconds. But I'm going to talk about that later and how to deal with that failed plan in a creative way. But just the fact that the plan fails shows that we can't make our mind do what we want it to do. And that's a really humbling experience. I think it's a very beautiful experience because it helps you have compassion. Compassion is when you recognize your own suffering and the sufferings of others. And that suffering is all around the unstable mind. So you start to feel this is the human condition, but this is something we can change. Why can we change it? We can change it because the mind is changeable. We can develop anything. We can train, we can develop. And of course the hot word nowadays in science is neuroplasticity. Everyone's talking about neuroplasticity as if it's an incredibly new invention, but the Buddha talked about it 3,000 years ago. Scientists are just catching up. But it's quite interesting that they're using language. Obviously the Buddha didn't use the word neuroplasticity, it's too long for a start. He had more snappy ways of communicating. But he was saying the same thing. What does neuroplasticity mean? It means that we can develop our mind. We can change, we can develop new pathways of thinking and experiencing. Of course the scientists are very locked into the whole idea of brain. They talk about neural pathways, and that's fine. In Buddhism we believe consciousness is beyond the brain, but if people need to think about their brain, it's a good starting point. It's okay. So the whole notion here is that we have this capacity to change, to transform. Why is that? It's because our ultimate state is pure. Now this is a hard pill to swallow for people who've grown up in a culture that's told them their ultimate state is sinful. It's a very different approach, isn't it? But it's very interesting if you look at how we live our lives. Pretty much everything we do in our life is proof that ultimately we are pure. Why is that? It's because we spend so long in states of dissatisfaction. We constantly feel there's something better. This isn't enough. There must be more. So there's a hint that there's an inner purity. In Buddhism we call this Buddha nature, but you can call it limitless potential if you want. We kind of know that there's something else. We know there's more to it than just this ordinary mind. In fact, every time somebody, the whole concept of Buddha nature, of course, is very deep and very profound and hard to understand, but a very simple way of relating to it is, why do you sit down on a cushion to meditate? Isn't that you acknowledging your Buddha nature? Why on earth would you sit on a cushion and meditate if you didn't believe that you have the potential to achieve the result of what you're doing? So there's a kind of knowing, isn't there? You sit down to meditate because you know that you have the potential to progress. That's Buddha nature. So having that background thinking, that we have this purity within, it's very important. We use images such as the crystal covered in mud. The mind is like a crystal covered in mud. The mud is the sort of neurosis and confusion and pain and problems. But we can change, we can train, we can develop and clear away the mud. So this is what makes us think about meditating. And then how? How do we meditate? We need guidance, we need support, so that's why we turn to the teachings. The teachings of Buddha contain all that support and guidance. And the reason why this talk, I think it's a very clever title, it's called, I don't know if I dreamt it up or one of you, I can't remember, but whoever dreamt it up, it's a great title. Ancient Wisdom for Modern Times. That's telling us something. It's ancient wisdom, sure, yes. The Buddha was teaching nearly 3,000 years ago in India for modern times. Why is that? You know, some people might say, well, how is this relevant, this ancient Buddhism? How is it relevant now? Now we're living in the 21st century with cell phones and offices and modern problems. So how on earth is this ancient thing relevant? Does it not need to be modernized? Many people have tried to modernize it. It's pointless. Why would we need to modernize something when actually this ancient wisdom is timeless? Because what was the Buddha talking about? He was talking about the mind. He wasn't that interested in the details, he was interested in the mind itself. So maybe 2,500 years ago, somebody was suffering about something that now we're suffering about something different. Our cell phone breaks, we lose our job, the economy crashes, whatever. The Buddha wasn't interested in the details. The Buddha was showing us how to work with the mind, and that is timeless. The mind itself is timeless. So we're not looking at the content, we're looking at how the mind functions. 2,500 years ago, people had 10 fingers on their hands, they had 10 toes on their feet. They had mind. Now it's the same. So we don't need to think this needs to be updated or modernized. It's all there in the teachings. When I teach in Google and Facebook and all these companies, I teach the words of the Buddha. I might use slightly different language, but I don't deviate at all from the lineage. There's no point, and also it wouldn't work if I did. I teach the Sutra of the Four Mindfulnesses. It's all in there. So the Sutra of the Four Mindfulnesses was the words of the Buddha about mindfulness, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of mind, etc. You maybe just need to use language that people can appreciate. I mean, when I'm teaching in the corporate world, I'm not there to convert people to Buddhism. In fact, the reason I became a Buddhist was because it says in the small print, do not ever try to convert others. I thought that's what I want to do. They make it so hard to get in that you want to get in. But it's very important to me that we're not going around preaching and trying to convert people. We respect all faiths or no faith. We're not interested in saying we're the right ones and everyone else is wrong. So when I go to these companies, I'm not trying to convert them to Buddhism, but I teach Buddhism. I maybe just don't use the B word.
You use the M word.
What's the M word?
Mindfulness.
They like to call it mindfulness, and I don't know. I've never studied the John Kabat-Zinn mindfulness or Rob Nairn's mindfulness. I've never looked. I kind of read one of the manuals once, and then it was just too much. I had to close it because I thought this is not the approach I'm going to use. I'm teaching mindfulness, which is a Buddhist word. The Four Mindfulness Sutra. I mean, it's all in there. I'm not against people who teach the sort of modern mindfulness. I think, it's great. There's lots out there. People will gravitate towards whatever suits them. But my teachers told me just teach Dharma, and if you use the right language and teach the essence of Dharma rather than just the rituals, it's for everyone. And in fact, I started doing this many years before mindfulness became popular. I became a monk 24 years ago, and I started to teach about 20 years ago. I had no plans to teach, but one day Akam Rinpoche said you have to give talks, and I nearly died. And so I started to teach in Buddhist centres, but then I got very bored with that. I started to think, why am I sitting around in these Buddhist centres talking to people who already know Buddhism? I need to go out there and help people who are really on the front lines of stress in hospitals. I wanted to work in hospitals and prisons. And this was way before mindfulness existed, in this new mindfulness. So I went into hospitals and prisons and I ran stress drop-in rooms in a hospital, where I sat in a room. They put me in a room with no windows, which was a bit strange, but anyway, I sat there all day and doctors came in and I taught them in their breaks. And then I started working with, have you heard of McKinsey? They're a big management consultancy. Somehow I ended up there, floating around in my robes in this McKinsey place, and they loved it. They really enjoyed it. I taught them the 7 points of mind training. We studied the 4 foundations, we did Tonglen. I just didn't use any Buddhist words, but I used the teachings. I didn't talk about Buddha nature, I talked about potential. I didn't talk about karma, I talked about results. I mean, you just use different language. And I was doing a lot of that. I was working in many different companies, and it was going quite well. And then I went into retreat and sort of disappeared off the scene. And when I came out of retreat, everyone said, oh, there's this thing now called mindfulness, because it all happened I was in retreat from 2005 to 2009, and that's when it really started to boom. And I thought, well, what's that? And I came out and found out what they were doing and thought, well, it's pretty much the same. It's shine, it's breathing, and they call it the body scan. In Buddhism, we call it mindfulness of body. It's very similar. So I was quite pleased that people were doing that, and I'm very supportive of the people who do that. It's just I myself don't use that particular approach. So where was I? I was talking about practicing. So we follow the teachings because the Buddha explained how to train the mind. It gives us a lot of advice, a lot of information, a lot of techniques. But it's not really called Buddhism, and that's something we really need to get straight. There is no such thing as Buddhism. That's a completely made-up word that was invented in around the 1940s. Ism. Ism's an English suffix, term. When Buddhism started coming to the West, the Westerners said, oh, well, they're saying Buddha, we better put ism on the end. It's Buddhism. It's not called Buddhism originally. It's called much more interesting things. Because when you say Buddhism, it sounds like it's named after the Buddha, as if there was this person called Buddha and he started a religion named after himself, as if it was, John, and he called it Johnism. It's not that. So the term in Tibetan is Nang Rigpa. Nang Rigpa. Nang means inner, and Rigpa means many things, but in this context it means science. So it means the inner science, or the science of mind. That's what Buddhism really means, the science of mind. The science of awareness. Rigpa also means awareness. One is studying awareness, not studying it in books, but studying it experientially. So that's universal. Anyone can appreciate that. So if you explain it in those terms, everybody wants to practice. Everyone would be quite happy to meditate as long as you don't make them feel they're having to enter a religion. Some people love religion, some people don't. So you have to find a language that suits everyone. So the science of mind, we're looking at mind, we're looking at how it functions. We're looking at how to transform it, how to purify it. When we meditate, we are working with our mind in order to free ourselves from suffering and in order to find true liberation. But what does that really mean in practical terms? It means the first step is to deal with stress. I mean, that's really the first step for everybody. That's why I became a monk. I was incredibly stressed. It's a slightly strange form of stress management, but there you go. That's what I chose. So many people enter the path because they're enormously stressed. And that's the great thing about meditation, is it helps to transform stress. So I think there are three major things we can look at this morning. How meditation helps us to transform stress, how it helps us to increase mental clarity or focus or awareness, presence. That sounds like many things, but it's one category. And the third category is transformation of emotion, working with emotion. So I'd like to talk about these three elements. And first I want to talk about stress. So what is stress? Stress is a word we use now, but it just means suffering. The Buddha's first teaching was we're all stressed. I mean, in the text it says the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, but what does that mean? We're stressed. What are we going to do about it? What's the second noble truth? Where does the stress come from? That's me making those people write that list and then saying, is it that or is it your thoughts? The Four Noble Truths are the teaching of the Buddha that underpins everything. The third noble truth was, is there an end to this stress? We always ask that, don't we? When's it going to end? Well, the Buddha said, yes, there is freedom. And the fourth noble truth is how. What is the path? So, stress. How does meditation help to work with this? We think stress is a modern thing. It's just because the word stress is now thrown around a lot in modern life. But there's been stress all through history. We think it's worse now, but imagine living in the medieval times, dying of the bubonic plague, or when London was burning down, or whatever was happening here. You know, things have always been difficult. Let's not try and assume it's all got horribly worse, but maybe there is one aspect that has got worse, which is that the mind has speeded up, and that's due to technology. Technology is a great thing. It can help us communicate, it can save lives, all that, etc., but it has sped up our mind. And we've become so obsessed with the outer technology that we've lost sight of the inner technology. And that's why we need to look at the science of mind. We've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars to explore the moon. We can make rockets that go to Mars or the moon or whatever, but we have no idea what's going on in here. So it's time to turn the telescope around. The science of mind is to look at the mind. So technology definitely has sped things up. I noticed this really strongly when I went into retreat, because the whole smartphone thing happened also while I was in retreat. Before retreat, only the very elite had iPhones. Very few people. And after retreat, when I came out of retreat in 2009, everyone had an iPhone. And the first thing I noticed, because in retreat you have nothing, you have no technology whatsoever. Rinpoche searched our rooms on the first day for phones, pencils and pens, we weren't allowed them, books. You know, it was very strict. And I'm very grateful for that, because it was an amazing time to just meditate and basically be backed into a corner with no other outlets except to have to make friends with yourself. So there was no technology, no contact with the outside world. We had a letter once a month from our family, that was it. And they were closely screened. They weren't allowed to say anything of what was going on outside. So totally cut off. And then when I came out of retreat, you're supposed to do a kind of slow process of coming out. There's rules. You're supposed to come out very slowly. But not for me, because the day after retreat ended, I was on a plane with Rinpoche to Amsterdam. And he in fact, before the retreat ended, he sent a message in saying, make sure Thubten's got an up-to-date passport, because we were travelling straight away. And that's how we worked. It worked for me. It was good. It was good. I just came out of retreat and I just threw myself into Rinpoche's arms and just carried on. It was fantastic. So anyway, what I noticed was this enormous speed, because when you've been away from it, you really notice it. The first thing I noticed was that all the TV programs are faster. And that wasn't only because I'd been away from it. I researched this. I looked at old films and new films, and you can see how the camera used to linger longer on one frame, and now it's snap, snap, snap. People get bored. A friend of mine makes commercials. He showed me his latest commercial, and I made me dizzy, because it was so fast. So fast. But it has to be, because people expect that. The attention span is so quick. The other thing I noticed was I was in London, on the London Underground, and you go up those escalators, and I don't know if any of you have been there, you have these posters all the way up the wall, ads. Well, now they were all videos. Video ads. I hadn't seen that before. Everyone else got used to it, but I was suddenly shocked by this. And it just made me feel, my goodness, we've really sped up. We've gone crazy. And that speed has made stress worse, I think. So in a way, there is an element of stress that is more speedy and more manic. But I think also we need to realize there has always been suffering. So we need to not blame society too much. It's always been around, just in different ways. Now, I want to talk about how meditation works with stress. It's very interesting. I want to talk about this on the mental front and also the physical. In terms of the mind, what's really going on when we're stressed? Our mind is incredibly busy with too many thoughts. Did you know that we have 80,000 thoughts every day? Every day we have 80,000 thoughts, and most of them are not that useful. Most of them are repeats or random idle thinking. Some thoughts are useful, but many aren't. And what do we do with those thoughts? Well, I'd like to give you an example from our lineage, the great master Milarepa. Have you heard of Milarepa? Milarepa was a great master in Tibetan history, an enlightened Buddha from the 10th or 11th century. And he said, we run after our thoughts, just like when you throw a stick at a dog and it runs after the stick and brings the stick back to you. What does that mean? It means every time we have a thought, we're like a dog running after a stick. The dog runs after the stick, gets the stick, brings it back to you. You have another thought, another stick, the dog runs again. It's just endless running after each thought like a dog running after a stick. Then Milarepa said, what if you throw a stick at a lion? What happens then? The lion turns around and looks at who threw the stick. So that's meditation. Instead of being that dog that runs after those thoughts like running after a stick, we want to turn around like the lion and look at who threw this stick. Who's throwing these sticks? What's going on here? So that's turning around and looking. And so in meditation, we're starting to work with our thoughts. Now this now is a hugely important point. If you remember only one thing from today, please remember this, which is meditation is not about getting rid of your thoughts. A lot of people think that. And I hear this all the time. And I, as I mentioned to you, I'm going everywhere, all over the world teaching, so I meet many people and I also hear their ideas about meditation. I also am in the press a lot, so I get journalists asking me about meditation, and it's very interesting because when you speak to a journalist, you really find out the kind of lowest common denominator thinking of how people think about things. And they always say to me, oh, I've tried meditation, but I couldn't switch off. I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't blank my mind. This is such a disaster. It's not true. And there are many people out there teaching meditation in the wrong way because they're not well trained. They've been to a weekend course and now they've set themselves up as a teacher. Or they're a yoga teacher who has trained very well in yoga but not much in meditation, and they tend to tag a bit of meditation onto the end of their session. And what they generally say in front of their class is, now clear your mind. It's a total disaster. Everyone's sitting there trying to clear their minds, and it's warfare. It's Armageddon inside the head. Because the thoughts are just popping up and we can't get rid of them, and we think, how do I clear my mind? What do I do? What do I do? I can't stop thinking. The more I try to clear my mind, the more thoughts come, and it's a disaster. Meditation becomes enormously stressful. So that's a lie, it's a myth. It's not true. The Buddha never said clear your mind. So what is going on? Why are we trying to clear our mind? What is the motive there? Well, I think it's because people just want to knock themselves out sometimes. There's so much suffering, so much thinking, let's just knock ourselves out. You could bang your head against a wall, fall unconscious, 20 minutes of coma, and then you're back. Nothing's changed. What's the point of knocking yourself out? We're not trying to put ourselves in a coma. We're not trying to go into a sort of empty, blank state. If that were true, if that were what meditation is, there'd be a very easy way to get enlightened. You go to a hospital and you ask them to give you anesthetics constantly for the rest of your life. You just plug yourself into an IV, you're anesthetized, you're kind of gone, and that's it. But that's not true. That's not going to make us enlightened. It's not about empty, blank, nothing. That's not the point. So what is the point? The point is to learn how to deal differently with our thoughts, how to have a different relationship with our thoughts. And the examples given in the teachings, particularly the Vajrayana teachings, Vajrayana is the most sort of esoteric level of Buddhism, is that the mind is like the sky or the ocean. What are the features of the sky or the ocean? The sky has clouds, the ocean has waves. Does the ocean grab onto its own waves or worry about its own waves? No. Does the sky worry about its own clouds? No. Whether there are clouds or no clouds, it doesn't affect the sky. Big waves, small waves, doesn't affect the ocean. The waves are just the natural ebb and flow of the ocean. Similarly, thoughts are the natural manifestation of the mind. But what we do is we think they're separate, and we try to get rid of them, or we try and do something about them. So we're constantly either chasing our thoughts or pushing them away. What we need to understand is how just to leave them alone. Just leave them alone. So I quite like to use the example of traffic. Thoughts are like traffic on a busy road. Do you get into those cars or not? That's the question. Could you just stand at the side of the road and let the cars go by? Don't call the taxi. Because that's what we do. We put our hand out and get the taxi to stop. We get in the taxi, we go for a drive around town, we get out of the taxi, and we're not sure how we got there. Sometimes it's worse. Sometimes it feels like being kidnapped, and you're kind of bundled into the back of a van. A hood is put over your head, and then you're just thrown out of the back of the van on the highway outside town, and all your money's gone. That's emotions. That's emotions. Taxis are thoughts. The second example is emotions. Thoughts are just emotions. They're emotions are thoughts that hijack us. So what are we doing here with meditation is we're learning not to put our hand out and get that taxi to stop. So then the traffic can go by. We're trying not to engage in it. We will engage in it, that's what will happen, but then we come back. So how does it work? When you're new to meditation, you kind of need something to hold on to. So you use your breathing. That's very easy to use the breathing, and we'll try that later today. This morning I'm giving you the kind of conceptual, theoretical side, and then we're going to get practical after the break. So what happens? We are focusing on our own breathing, and it's all going well, and then 3 seconds later we're thinking. But that's okay, because that gives us the opportunity to then come back to the breath. And then the mind wanders, and we come back to the breath. The mind wanders, we come back to the breath. This is what a beginner needs to do, and the beginner could take many months or years even, but it's something to start with to just anchor yourself. Now, you might think, well, that's a very simplistic process, but actually it's incredibly profound, because what are you doing is you're disempowering your thoughts. You are deciding who's boss, because normally our thoughts and emotions are the boss, but here you are choosing. Your mind drifts off into a thought, and you learn to just come back to the breath, and that puts you back into your sense of choice. I am staying with the breath. Then the mind goes again, then you bring it back. It's training. It's like going to the gym and lifting weights. You train again and again. Now, how does this relieve stress? Well, very simply, stress is where our mind gets locked into a negative state. Our mind gets stuck in a taxi and doesn't know how to stop the taxi. The meter's going and the driver's just driving like a maniac, and you want to get out. So in the practice, because you're letting go and coming back to the breath, now there's more to it than that. It's very subtle. I'm going to explain this afternoon how it works. But just to get the concept around stress at the moment, because you're coming back to the breath, you're letting go. Now in the session you might not be having stressful thoughts. You might not be thinking in a stressful way. You might just be thinking about lunch or supper or emails or whatever. But you are letting go. And that means the more you train in that, the more mental freedom you can develop. So, does that make sense? Does it not make sense? If it doesn't, I'd be very happy to hear that it doesn't, because then I can explain more deeply. It makes sense? Okay. I will be forcing some questions out of you later. I mean, I'm not going to go around the room and insist you say things, but I'd really invite a lot of feedback, because then I can help you to understand more deeply. Any questions so far? Yes?
What if, while you're trying to let go of these thoughts, you feel or you find that there's actually something, a profound insight or something you want to hang on to? Or
that's the ego's biggest trick, is that when we're meditating, it's quite boring, so the ego throws up some insights. Come on, look at this. This is great, look at this. And then we want to write it down or do something about it. If it's a real insight, it will come back later. Seriously. This is a big trick that happens in meditation, is that we think, oh, that's a thought I really should do something about. But we need to just equalize the thoughts. They're just mind. Don't grab onto them. Bad thought, good thought, insight thought, whatever. Just leave it alone. If it's really important, it will come back. It will come back. Yes?
So you say that, each time you come back to the breath,
Yeah.
you disempower the thoughts.
Yeah.
So the thing that is disempowering the thoughts,
Yeah.
is that actually the mind? So is that...
It's awareness.
Is that what it is?
Awareness. And I'm going to
Is
talk a lot...
Is that what will cultivate?
Yeah.
The more you disempower
We're building
the
awareness, and I'm going to talk a lot about that later. Yes, at the back. Hi.
I believe this is actually a must. So,
Thank you.
now, I'm having like a bit of problems like within the initial phases of like my meditation journey and that's problems.
Yeah.
It's like at first, man, it begins. It's quite easy like to like notice like the coarse thoughts, but then after some time, like when you really try to apply yourself, like really try to progress hard and to achieve like this level of mindfulness, man, it's like you can realize that there are subtle thoughts. At the same time, you're just not aware. You just know it's there, and it gets you to that state of, okay, I'm trying to realize that like the subtle thoughts. I'm trying to realize the subtle thoughts.
No. You don't need to. You just need to let them be. You just need to let them be, and you're like, okay. A Zen master once said, you're like a house. And thoughts come in the front door and go out the back door, just don't offer them tea. so you're just letting them be. You're not trying to think, I must search these out and be aware of them. I must you just let them be. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about awareness. Okay, so I want to carry on a bit. So, the stress, how to deal with stress. I'm talking about it on a mental level. When What I mean to say is, how does meditation reduce our stress? First of all, we're talking about the mental side of things. I also want to talk about the physical side, because that's quite interesting. Now, of course, stress is originating in the mind, but it does reflect in the body. We all know what that feels like. Tired, exhausted, shoulders aching. And sometimes we've worked all day behind a desk, and then we get home and it feels like we've been climbing a mountain. And of course, the body hasn't done anything except sit behind a desk. I work in companies where they do not leave their chair. They go to the coffee machine on the chair with wheels. You know? So there's not much going on physically, but the body is exhausted. So what's going on? Of course, the stress is mental and it's manifesting physically. But it's interesting to look at some of the research about meditation. They've done a lot of research at Harvard and other places. Have you seen pictures of monks with shower caps on with wires coming out of them? They're not shower caps, but they've wired up their brain to see what's going on. And the research has shown that meditation changes our brain activity in a very healthy way. It reduces the flow of cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone, the stress chemical, that is incredibly exhausting. It's highly, highly toxic. It's very bad for you. It damages the organs, it leads to diabetes, it causes uneven fat distribution, it gives you high blood pressure. It's really bad for you. So then you might ask, why on earth have we got it? Did evolution do something mistaken here? But actually no, the reason we evolved with cortisol was because when we were hunter-gatherers living in the wilds, we were in danger a lot of the time, and we needed that fight or flight reaction. There's a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala creates that fight or flight response. So we'd be hunter-gatherers, we'd be in danger, there's predators coming, looking over the shoulder. Is there danger? Is there danger? When there's danger, the amygdala fires off danger signals that causes the release of cortisol and adrenaline in the body, and then we'd burn it off, and the levels would return to normal. Because we'd either fight or flee. We'd either punch the dinosaur on the nose, or whatever it is that's chasing us. Not dinosaur. I know that's incorrect. Anyway, and then, or we'd flee. We'd run away. So the fight or flight would bring the levels back down to normal. Now fast forward now to the 21st century, we are experiencing fight or flight all day when we don't need to. Because you're sitting behind a desk, an email comes in, the amygdala doesn't know the difference. The amygdala is very stupid. The amygdala it has no intelligence. It's just like a reactive muscle. It only knows pressure. So it doesn't know the difference between a predator or an email. It doesn't know. Yeah. So all it knows is pressure. So it reacts and cortisol is released, or it can be even a steady trickle of cortisol throughout the day, and we don't burn it off, and it's highly toxic, and we get tired. And then what do people do? They throw in more chemicals. Sugar, alcohol, nicotine, coffee. Everyone's sitting behind desks grabbing for that chocolate biscuit and they think they've got low blood sugar. Actually, they've just got too much cortisol. Not in all cases, but generally. So, what's going on there is that we're living in spikes of cortisol throughout the day, and we don't know how to bring the levels back to normal. What's the opposite of cortisol? Oxytocin. Oxytocin is a chemical in the body that makes us feel good. It's relaxing, it's love, it's compassion, it's happiness. We were first introduced to oxytocin the moment after we were born. When a baby is born, as soon as the baby emerges from the mother's womb, a huge spike in cortisol happens, because when you move from a uterus environment to an air environment, it's quite dangerous. So the baby's body has a gigantic spike in cortisol in order to deal with this change of state, and then the baby is placed on its mother's breast, and that produces oxytocin in both the baby and the mother, which is further enhanced by breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is an amazing training in resilience. Why? It's because from the moment the baby is born, the baby is programmed to go from a cortisol state to an oxytocin state. The mother teaches that to the baby. She teaches it to the baby. In traditional cultures, breastfeeding goes on till about the age 4. In modern society, it's a disaster. The infant formula industry is billions and billions of dollars, and they put out so much propaganda to tell people they shouldn't breastfeed. But actually breastfeeding programs the child for resilience, because the child is learning how to go into an oxytocin state. So that sets us up for life. Now, many of us didn't have that nurturing. Many people didn't have it. But the great thing is it's been proved that if you meditate, you are producing oxytocin. So it's interesting to know that the human experience of that through breastfeeding, through the mother. There are other things that also produce oxytocin. For example, any form of community or unconditional compassion. Ordinary love does not, because it's filled with fear or attachment or desire, but unconditional love, compassion does. They've measured oxytocin levels in various communities. The Maasai tribe have high levels of oxytocin because of their ethos around community. But a major method for creating oxytocin is meditation. And that's something we can all do, whether we had that nurturing or not. So when you learn this, you discover that you are in charge of your own levels of happiness and well-being. You are the boss. Because you are learning how to bring the cortisol down and produce that oxytocin state. Oxytocin. O-X-Y. Oxy. T-O-C-I-N. Oxytocin. That's why it's quite important to meditate first thing in the morning. Because another time when we produce a gigantic spike in cortisol is as soon as we wake up. Because when we wake up in the morning, the body produces a lot of cortisol to deal with the change of state. If you then meditate, you're bringing the levels down to oxytocin. It's interesting, isn't it? You are your own chemical lab. But for most people, I'm sorry to say this, it's a meth lab. Because they are filled with cortisol, filled with adrenaline, and they throw in drugs and alcohol and chemicals and sugar and additives, and we're just a toxic waste dump. You can clean it up through meditation, because then you're learning to produce your own happiness. And that is an amazing skill to learn. Because for most people, the whole notion of well-being or happiness is a totally external thing. I will have well-being when this happens or when that happens, or I need to pay thousands of dollars to go and lie in a spa and have cucumbers put on my eyes, and then I will have well-being. Happiness for most people is a result. The result of, I'll be happy when, I'll be happy if, I'll be happy because, I'll be happy if only. You know what I mean? X, Y, and Z will make me happy. That's an incredibly vulnerable way to live. Why? There's two reasons. One is that all those things around us are impermanent, therefore we can't rely on them. And if our happiness depends on impermanent things, it's unstable. We are dependent on the unreliable. That's the first reason. The second reason is that grasping after outer things for our happiness creates more grasping. This is a very simple truth that very few people have understood. People think if they attach to something and they grasp after something, when they get the thing, the attachment will go. It's not true. Because attachment leads to more attachment. It's like an addiction. We want something, we get it, then we want more, or we want something else. Because the more we're wanting, the more we are creating more want. What's actually happening is we're creating a sense of deficiency. When we give our happiness and well-being away to external things, we're telling ourselves we don't have anything. The more I tell myself I need to feel good, the more I am telling myself I lack good feelings. So we're constantly kind of digging our own grave by creating feelings of deficiency inside ourselves. Now, when you understand meditation, and it's also very exciting to look at this chemical process of cortisol, oxytocin, etc., you start to understand how you could be in charge of your own happiness. You can put yourself into that state whenever you need to. People are trying to get back to their mother's breast constantly. That's why people emotionally eat. We want that comfort. We want to be in the womb or on the breast. Why? It's because that's when we remember feeling oxytocin. So do it through meditation. So I do this many, many times a day. I travel a lot. Sometimes I'm on an aeroplane 3 times a week. I do insane things like fly to Los Angeles for 2 days and then back to the UK. It's insane.
Insane.
But I'm okay because I do this. I'm standing in the airport queue. I'm standing at security. I'm on a train. I'll just give myself some oxytocin. How? It's very simple. You just feel the ground under your feet. You relax your shoulders. You just let go of all the thoughts and you just be present. It gives you a boost of energy. It gives you nourishment. You discover that the present moment is a whole well of nourishment inside you, and you can drink from that well anytime you want. You could be in the dentist chair, you could be in labour giving birth to a child, you could be getting shouted at by your boss. You can do it then as well. But you've got to train. You have to train. I go to a lot of companies and they say, can you give us a method that we can use when we're in a stressful situation? And I say no. Because when you're in a stressful situation, your habit takes over. I can give you a method to practice when you're not stressed, and that will prepare you for when you are stressed. But you can't keep all this up your sleeve and then whip it out when you need it. You've got to be training every day. But it's very interesting and very exciting, all the research that's going on. Of course, Buddhists have known this for centuries, but it's nice that now science is catching up and talking about the health benefits of meditation. That's very nice, very exciting. Science is the new God, so if science says it's true, it must be true. Of course, in Buddhism we've known this all along because we have the lineage and we have proof, the history of the tradition that it works. But the scientific research has made it much more accessible to people, and that's probably why meditation is becoming so hugely popular in the world today. So I want to just touch on the 2 other major benefits of meditation. We talked about stress. I also want to talk about mental clarity and emotions. And then after the break, we're going to get down to business. So I want to talk about mental clarity because this is a very important thing. I'll tell you a funny story about this. When I first started teaching meditation in the corporate world, there wasn't a language for it. This word mindfulness wasn't being used. Nobody knew what it was. So I had to really... I was working from the ground up. And I had to really smash a lot of misconceptions. And the funniest one was when I went to a company to teach the staff meditation. The boss, it was a small firm, and the boss had called me in. He'd read about me in the papers, and he'd called me in. So it was quite weird because he'd called me in, but then he also was a bit frightened about me being there. It was a sort of weird mixture in his mind. So before I was allowed into the boardroom, he took me to a small room. I thought, this is like a job interview, okay. And he said to me, look, I'm really impressed with what you do. It's great. I'm so happy you're here. But please, please, please don't make them too relaxed. Can you believe it?
Okay.
So I asked him what he meant, and he said, well, I don't want them to become useless. And it was really interesting to me because it showed so profoundly what people think meditation is. That he thought I was probably going to hypnotize his staff and they'd be in a kind of trance, or he thought I'd put them into a deep state of relaxation where they'd just be kind of lounging behind the desk, not doing any work. Phones ringing, can't be bothered to answer it, feet up on the desk. And that is usually the image of relaxation, is that it's quite a passive state. And I meet a lot of people who say, I want to learn from you, but I don't want to lose my edge. It's very interesting. People think that's what relaxation is. When you explain properly, they understand. It's very different. Relaxation is good. It means you're staying calm. You're not getting wound up. We all know, you know, when you watch a disaster movie and people are trapped in a burning elevator or the end of the world is coming, there's always that person who stays calm, who saves the day. That's what it is. Relaxation means you're not spinning like a top. You're not running around like a maniac. You're staying calm but focused. Relaxation doesn't mean you go floppy and dopey and stoned and trance-like. It means you're very calm and very focused. Because meditation increases mental awareness and clarity and precision. So it's very good for your work. It doesn't mean you lose your edge. It means that your edge becomes clearer to you. Now, I work with a lot of groups where we're not even doing the meditation because of stress at all. I work with actors on film sets. They're not stressed. Well, they are in a certain way, but that's not the main issue. They're learning the meditation because they want to have total stage presence and they want to be completely in the moment. I also work with a lot of kids. I work in a lot of schools and a lot of universities, and we're doing meditation for 2 minutes at the start of each lesson so that the kids can be super focused before they learn. So that's nothing to do with stress. It's a whole other level of what meditation can do, is that you are developing that mental clarity and focus. How? Well, very simply, when you're observing your breath, you're putting your awareness in a very subtle, refined state of concentration. When we try it later, you'll see what I mean, because I'm going to ask you to literally feel the air brushing against the skin at the edge of your nostrils. That's quite precise. That increases mental focus and clarity. So meditation can bring you a sharper, more aware, concentrated mind, but relaxed at the same time. I'm working at the moment with doctors. It's a very exciting project. For the first time, we are having meditation training as part of the medical degree in the National University of Ireland. This is very exciting because it means the doctors are learning meditation as a skill for their work. And I look at surgeons as an example. Surgeons have to be super concentrated, but they get very tense, and that's why they can't perform more than 1 or 2 operations in a day, because they don't know how to be concentrated and relaxed at the same time. If you were a meditator, you could go on much longer. Any of you who've met Akon Rinpoche will see that he was the living proof of this. He was so relaxed and yet so focused. All these funny stories pop into my head, and I keep squashing them down because some of them are a bit controversial. Okay, look, Rinpoche was not a monk. Okay, so he was allowed to drink, and some people think this is hugely shocking, the Buddhist teacher drinking, but he wasn't a monk, and anyway, he didn't get drunk. He just liked the odd glass of wine. And one time, it was at Samye Ling. Have any of you been to Samye Ling? You know he had this cottage. It was the cottage behind the temple. And he'd gone out to an evening at somebody's house. And I was waiting up for him. And all the corridors were dark. It was really late when he got back. And I heard the door come, so I didn't bother turning the lights on, and I went to the door. And he came in, and he had his 2 nephews, and they were holding him up either side. And there'd obviously been some alcohol. And as he was walking down the corridor, I remember the thought, he was walking down the corridor, kind of stumbling a bit and being held up by these 2 boys, and the thought went through my head, he's pissed. He's drunk. As soon as I said that, he whipped his head round and he said, "There's a pin on the floor." I said, "What?" He said, "There's a pin on the floor." And it was totally dark. I turned on the light, And sure enough, there was like a sewing needle on the floor. So, he wasn't drunk. He's enlightened. So really, it's all about that clarity, that focus. You don't lose your edge. You become much more, and also more present. I mean, being present is really part of the game, isn't it, with meditation? And very few people know how to be present. We're always somewhere else. We're never in this moment. Being in this moment is so important, and we miss this moment. We get to the end of our life and we weren't even there. We're on our deathbed and we look back and think, how much of my life was I actually there for? Because usually we're living ahead for the next thing. So what's next? What's next? And then it means when the next thing happens, we're busy with the next thing. We're never in that moment. And people spend huge amounts of money. People spend millions of dollars to be in the present moment. They do. They go to spas, they go to hotels, they go and lie on beaches in Thailand or Cape Town or wherever, to be in the moment, and then they lie there checking their phone to see what's going on at home. They can't be in the moment because they haven't trained their mind. No matter how much money you spend to be in the moment, unless you've trained your mind, you can't. So I say cut out the middleman and just be in the moment. I'm going to put a lot of tour operators out of business by saying this, but it's true, isn't it? When somebody's lying on the beach in a perfect 5-star resort, whatever, 5-star glamorous resort, what's actually happening? They're just lying there in a state of peace. The sun is beating down on their body, their muscles are all relaxed, they haven't got a care in the world. Well, you can produce that experience any way you want. You can be in a crowded train unable to get a seat, you can be hot and uncomfortable, you can still produce that experience because it's mindfulness, it's meditation. So being in the moment is so crucial, and the key here is to learn to be in the moment with love and joy, because many people are either in the moment wishing it was something else, I wish this moment was different, but you have to embrace your reality. If you're sick, if you're in pain, if you're traumatized, that is your moment. Remove the filter of resistance and embrace your moment, because you are beautiful in this moment as you are. You don't need to be well or healthy or beautiful or thin or whatever. As you are right now, in your whatever your mess may be, that is your beauty. Just be with that. That's meditation. So that's very important, very, very important. So I'm talking about 3 benefits. I promise I'll release you for a break in a minute. I'm talking about 3 benefits of meditation training. There are many, of course, but in the context of today's subject, I'm talking about 3. Stress reduction, mental clarity, and the third one is emotions. Dealing with our emotions. Our emotions normally really knock us around, like the guys in the van with the hood who take you off and hijack you. It's like that. The emotions really knock you around, knock us around. We're controlled by them. Emotions are just heavy thoughts, okay? They're not different. They're just thoughts with bells on. So when we are meditating, we are learning how to be less heavily controlled by those emotions. We're learning to be able to not buy into them so much, not be so heavily invested in them. There are many levels to this training, and tomorrow I'm talking about that in terms of the 3 vehicles. Tomorrow's talk is about the path of letting go, the path of transformation, and the path of purity. These are 3 different levels of working with the emotions. But in the context of today, let's just say it's about learning to invest one's energy in them less and not be so, controlled by them. And that's around meditating, because you learn to let go and just not drown in that. That doesn't mean we're going to stop having emotions. It means, could we actually start choosing emotions? Could we choose happiness? The most powerful thing I ever heard in my entire life probably was when Lama Yeshe Rinpoche said, happiness is a choice. He says it all the time, but one time he said it and it really went in. I thought, That is the answer. Happiness is a choice. You can choose to put yourself in a happy state wherever you are. Can I tell you another funny Rinpoche story? I was walking with Akon Rinpoche once in London. We were walking down the Thames. He was teaching at the London Centre. Originally, in those days, the London Samye Dzong was right by the River Thames. We're walking down the Thames, the main river in London. It's a beautiful walkway and everything's lovely. And it was really sunny, which is very rare in London. So it was like paradise. Walking down in the sunshine. I'm with my favourite person in the whole world, my Rinpoche, and we're walking together. There's nobody else around. When we were alone, we could just hang and be casual with each other. There was no formality. It was lovely. And we were walking down this thing, all the sun, and I said to Rinpoche, it's really beautiful, isn't it? And somehow, as I was saying that, we had to then enter this tunnel. And we went into this tunnel, and it was dark. It smelled of urine, and there was graffiti all over the walls and vomit on the floor. It was just hideous. And as somehow it just happened that as I was saying it's so beautiful, we ended up walking through this corridor, and Rinpoche just turned to me and said, for me, everything is beautiful. Because I was in this horrible stench and thinking, oh God, no, get back to the sun, I can't bear it. And he was just relaxed, everything is beautiful. He had understood that happiness is a choice. He chose to be happy in every moment. Even the hard ones, actually especially the hard ones. I remember once Lama Yeshe, who was Akon Rinpoche's brother, said, my brother eats obstacles for breakfast. Meaning that the bigger the trauma or pain or suffering, he can. Have you seen those pictures of those wrathful deities, Mahakala? That they eat obstacles for breakfast. They are chewing up the mind poisons and smacking their lips together and loving it. So that's the choice of happiness. Choosing to be happy no matter what. So on that note, let's go and have tea. So let's say dedication prayer. Sibe sole drowa